This is the 5-Minute Monday Motivator with me, Allistair, and it's time to get your week started champion-minded. Hey everybody, welcome to it. It's Monday. It's the 5-Minute Monday Motivator with me, Allistair. Now, 2020 has been a year like no other. I'm sure you'll agree. It's been challenging. It's been tough. It's been interesting, is some of the words that some of my guests on this year's podcast have described. But it certainly has been. But in this episode, I'd love to take you through 7 reflective questions on the past year. And before we can move forward into 2021, I think it's important that you self-reflect on the year you've had. You look into the things you did, the person you became, the decisions you made, the choices you made, your mindset, all these things. So I'd love you to take pen to paper and write down these 7 things, these 7 self-reflection questions that I have for you in this episode. So are you ready? Number 1, in 2020, what did you learn about yourself from this past year? Okay, what were the things that maybe you didn't know before March 13th, which was pretty much the universal lockdown day of the COVID-19? But what did you learn about yourself from this past year? That's number 1. Number 2, which relationships meant the most to you this past year and why? Now, you might remember, if you've been a regular listener to the Champion Minded podcast, I've spoken about relationships quite a lot this year in 2020. In fact, it was probably for me personally one of the best years of nurturing relationships, of building new relationships. But which relationships meant the most to you this past year, and why? Write it down. Number 3, what was the biggest challenge you faced this year and how did you handle it? That's a pretty interesting one. I've had a few challenges this year as well. Obviously, like many out there, having to adapt to this new normal, so to say. A lot of my work is on the road, speaking and being in front of clients. This year I've been at home pretty much 85% of the time. It's been one of the years where I've traveled the least. And that was a big challenge for me, which I had to adapt. I brought out online courses. I had to learn how to use my laptop better, how to use social media better. So those are one of the biggest challenges I had that I had to overcome. Number 4, what was the proudest moment from this past year and why? So I'm sure there were some things that you're pretty proud about. You know what? Not just one. Maybe if you can think of more, write them down. Remember, when we write down our accomplishments, when we write down the things we're proud about, that's what builds our self-esteem. That's what builds our confidence. And that's why it's one of the exercises that I give a lot of my clients is to, at the end of the day, write down 1 or 2 things that you're proud about, that you did that day, for example. Good. Number 5, what was one of the most meaningful compliments you received this past year, and why was it so meaningful to you? So maybe it was something with regards to working on a project. Maybe it was something with regards to getting fitter, for example, or training for a half marathon or whatever it may be. But what was one of the most meaningful compliments you received this past year? Maybe it was from a good friend who said, "Thank you so much for being there at this time when I needed you most." Number 6 in our 7 reflective questions for 2020. And it is, if you could change one thing from this past year, what would you change and why? Again, if you could change one thing from this past year, what would you change and why? And number 7, the last one, given all your experiences, insights, and lessons learned from this past year, what's the best advice you could give yourself for next year, 2021? So again, a quick recap of those 7 self-reflective questions. Number 1, what did you learn about yourself from this past year? Number 2, which relationships meant the most to you this past year and why? Number 3, what was one of the biggest challenges you faced this past year and how did you handle it? Number 4, what was one of your proudest moments from this past year and why? Number 5, what was one of the most meaningful compliments you received this past year and why was it so meaningful to you? Number 6, if you could change one thing from this past year, what would you change and why? And the final one was number 7, given all your experiences, insights, and lessons learned from this past year, what's the best advice you could give yourself for next year? There you have it, guys. I wish you an amazing Monday. I wish you an amazing week ahead. And remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion-minded.